Good evening, I'm Cathy Lewis, and we have a special treat for you tonight, a conversation with Dr. Howard Jones, who put Hampton Roads on the map, who helped pioneer a process that made parents of couples who had struggled with infertility, a man who accomplished all that after retiring from his first gig. We're very happy to have an opportunity to talk with Dr. Jones, who, along with his wife, Dr. Georgiana Jones, is responsible for the first in vitro fertilization birth in the United States. It is an extraordinary chapter in a larger story that is now a part of the biography of more than 3 million people around the globe. Dr. Jones has been honored countless times, very recently, by the foundation which bears his name, and they produced a video tribute to the Joneses' groundbreaking work.
As early as 1971, IVF was already involved in bioethical issues. And they decided to have a meeting, which really was the inaugural meeting of what was to be the Kennedy Institute, which had been announced just 2 or 3 weeks before. They decided that on this occasion they would also like to discuss in vitro fertilization. This was before any baby had ever been born. But the Kennedys knew about in vitro fertilization because the president of the Kennedy Institute, named only 2 weeks before this meeting, was Andre Helligers, who was an obstetrician who had been in our department at Hopkins, and he was there when Bob Edwards in 1965 came to Hopkins, and he and I worked trying to create fertilization of the human egg in vitro. I think Andre was astonished at this and its bioethical issues, and he tacked this on to this inaugural meeting of the Kennedy Institute. So that from the beginning, when IVF was presented to the public, it always seemed to come out pretty well from a bioethical point of view.
The flood of research that Doctors Howard and Georgiana Jones delved into for the next several years eventually led to the birth of thousands of babies.
Certainly the Jones Institute has always been on the forefront of new research procedures, new technologies that can be applied clinically. And Dr. Howard Jones, of course, is always thinking of new ideas. He's a man of extraordinary vision. He has recently, in his 97th year, led discussions on the future of IVF, alternative methods of fertilization, and what the impact of cryopreservation will mean to these new methodologies.
In 1978, if a patient and her husband with infertility came to a specialist and sought help, there would be, on average, only about a 50% chance that the problem could be solved, even using donor sperm for male infertility. And now, 30 years later, if an infertility couple seeks help, there is essentially a 100% chance that that patient could be helped.
One of the journalists asked Dr. Jones whether he felt he was playing God by doing in vitro fertilization and setting guidelines. Dr. Jones quickly responded, "I do believe that that job has already been filled."
I hope that everyone within the sound of my voice would be prepared to join with us to go those miles. With your help, young investigators or contemporary investigators of all ages, notice I include the old, should be able to solve the problems I mentioned and others to make IVF much more efficient, less costly, and more generally applicable. We have miles to go. Let's go it together. Thank you.
Miles to go, and we are delighted to have a chance to talk with Dr. Howard Jones, who's a professor emeritus at the Eastern Virginia Medical School. Dr. Jones, nice to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to talk to you again.
Oh, I tell you, I was watching that the video from 1981. First of all, struck by the fact that now it looks like a long time ago, doesn't it?
It is a long time ago.
It is, isn't it? But boy, it seems like yesterday. What an extraordinary event that was. And a lot of us who are in media in this community were here at that time and remember it very well as an extraordinary event that brought media from all over the country, well, in fact, from all over the world here. And as you think back to that moment, you and your wife, Dr. Georgiana Jones, I remember that there were moments where you weren't 100% certain that this was going to necessarily have a happy ending. I remember there was some complication somewhere along the way.
Well, not the general public, but some people in the public thought we shouldn't be doing this because they said we're going to create abnormalities. We didn't have any real reason to believe that from the experimental work that had been done. But that naturally was in her mind.
Oh, I
and
see.
So that it was with a sense of great relief when Elizabeth was born, and she turned out to be quite normal.
Had everything she was supposed to have.
Had everything
that
she
was
was
a great
supposed
day
to have.
indeed. And you talked in that videotape about what these intervening years have been like in terms of bringing this technology to more prospective parents. And you talked about the twin goals of making it more efficient and bringing down the cost.
Yes.
As you look out over the next 10 years, what do you think we could be looking at in that regard?
Well, I think IVF will become much more efficient than it now is. It is an odd thing to think, but human reproduction is an inefficient process. You wouldn't realize that because of all the people. But the truth of the matter is that when the sperm and egg meet, on average, there are exceptions to what I'm about to say, but on average, when the sperm and the egg meet, there's only about 1 chance in 5 that meeting will result in the fertilization of an egg which can develop and a child will be born. The reason there's so many people about is that there are about 12 times a year that can occur. So that's why there are plenty of people in the population. IVF, as mentioned before, now makes it possible for almost 100% of couples who are persistent and who in rare circumstances might be prepared to accept donor sperm or donor eggs, and in even rarer circumstances a donor uterus, a surrogate uterus. 100% of people probably can have their problem solved. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
But IVF is not as efficient as it might be. And I think there's an opportunity in the next decade for that efficiency to be greatly, greatly improved. And that can be done by increasing the efficiency of the eggs, which are now ones that in mating with a sperm will be discarded by nature. And we now understand a little bit about why only 1 in 5 is successful, and it has to do with the lack of the energy mechanism within the egg. And there are theoretical ways that this can be overcome. And there are experiments now going on in the laboratory dealing with trying to supply extra energy, which will make 100% of the eggs, or maybe not 100%, but greatly increase the 20% that now exists, so that all the eggs will be capable of producing a embryo which will come to birth.
Which should, I suppose, then make it less expensive for couples because the chance of success earlier on becomes greater?
That is exactly the case. You'd almost be able to guarantee that with 1 egg harvest, we would have sufficient material to work with so that we would guarantee that was going on. That's only one approach to making things better.
Wow.
But that's a very important one.
I was looking at those pictures of you, and we get to see those from time to time when you have the reunions of these babies and their families and what have you. You know, I don't know how you could get tired of it, but I guess I should ask you that. I mean, Do you ever say, "Oh my gosh, another reunion"? I mean, are they all? They couldn't all be as special to you, but maybe they are. I don't know.
They're all very exciting because each one of them has a little bit different angle than another. And so those angles are always interesting. There's sociological aspects of things.
What do you mean when you talk about sociological aspects?
Well, having to do with a story of a couple who might have done a great many things to try to get pregnant, right. Going here and going there, and it's finally solved. Couples who have no family and therefore their situation is different and so on. So that I think it's important to understand all these things and try to accommodate to the various things, situations.
And the other interesting thing is to look out, and I can remember back when in 1981, you know, there were ethical concerns at that time. Some people raised some concerns with you.
Well, that's true, and that's not entirely back of us because there are still ethical issues associated with what we're about. Particularly the concern about the moral status and indeed the legal status of the fertilized egg,
right.
In its early stages. I think the law is quite clear on that in the United States. The law is that I think it's easier to formulate this in the developmental object, we'll call it that. We call it a conceptus. The question is, when should society protect that? Yes. And in the United States, the law is quite clear that protection is provided with viability, and that's very late in pregnancy. However, there are others who think otherwise, who think that the fertilized egg is a person. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are those individuals, if they follow that to its logical conclusion, are not prepared to use IVF.
Right.
So that this is an individual decision which we have to respect.
Sure. But I wonder, as you look at the science of that, and you've had an opportunity to look at that over many, many years now, where do you come down on that question, or are you satisfied to let the courts sort of sort out those issues?
Well, I think the Supreme Court got it right. Through the years, individuals have tried to identify a physiological event which seemed to be a major shift that would indicate, that's something that indicates that from now on society should protect that individual. Quickening was at one time thought to be that place. Then when the stethoscope was invented and you could hear the heartbeat, well, that was the event. Mm-hmm. Then later on in life, later on in time, I would say, when it became possible to examine the brain waves of the developing conceptus, that was thought to be the case. But it's interesting that in discussing this point with moral theologians or others, philosophers and so on, they often turn to the biologist and say, tell me of some major event that occurs during pregnancy that we can put our hat on, that's when there's been a change in the protection by society. And I think the Supreme Court got that right because here they said when the conceptus, the child, can exist on its own, viability, that's a major, major step. So I'm comfortable with that particular analysis of the situation.
You know, I have to, I know we could probably talk all night about the science of this and the sociological implications, but anytime I get a chance to talk with you, and I haven't had a chance since I finished the book that you wrote, the love story book that you wrote of the letters,
War and Love,
right, which was a collection of the letters and commentary on the letters that passed between you and your late wife, Dr. Georgiana Jones.
Yes.
It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful relationship.
Well, it was a beautiful relationship as far as I was concerned. That's true, right.
Well,
sure thank you for commenting about that.
It was really, it was the thing that really, it's just a lovely book. But beyond that, the other piece of that that's very striking, I think, to women who are younger is the struggles that your wife went through, being a brilliant young professional woman who was also a wife and a mother, and all of the rest of it. I mean, it was a very compelling to read her, and she was pretty candid about her thoughts about all of that.
Oh yes, right. Well, there's interesting stories about that. I don't know whether you have time to go into that, but when she wrote her first scientific paper, her colleague, who was the senior author, almost wanted to leave her name off the paper because he said, and this was in 1938, he said that if a female name is on that paper, it will not be accepted. This was a paper submitted to the journal Science. So her name went in there as G. Emery Seeger, not revealing by that name. It was kind of a neuter name. So that shows the change that has occurred, but it also shows the situation that women were in at that time as far as participating in scientific matters and research and so on. And I'm sure that applies probably to public affairs, to your end.
Well, certainly back in the day, there were issues, no question about it. But I thought her letters had such a depth to them and such an honest candor about them that made it very compelling reading, and it was just a great book. So I hope that people are still getting the book Love Letters. It's a really, really beautiful book. As you look forward now, because you're still lecturing and talking about these issues that have been raised in the tape that we looked at a bit earlier, as you move forward, what are your hopes for, in addition to the efficiency and perhaps making things more affordable? What do you expect to see when you look, say, 50 years in the future, 100 years in the future, when it comes to this technology?
Well, you know, it might be possible to have reproduction without an egg and without a sperm. It might be possible to take a cell from the body, as was done with Dolly, for instance,
right,
and cause that cell to undergo what we call meiosis. That means that the chromosomes will be reduced in number by a half. And then do the same thing with your mate. Have them fused, and then you have a new individual, just as you would if there were a sperm and egg together, and have that develop so that we could have reproduction without either an egg or a sperm. Now, I'm looking way ahead. I'm not looking, that's not going to happen in the next decade or two, but maybe 50, maybe 100 years, we might have that. And then if we want to look even further than that, it might be that the prediction that was made by Aldous Huxley in Brave New World might even occur. And that's what he called exogenesis. That is to say, that the developing conceptus is kept in vitro until viability. Now, no one is working on that in the laboratory at the present time, but soon after Aldous Huxley published his book, there were people who did work on that, and it's interesting that the Japanese succeeded in having a lamb develop about 50% of the way through pregnancy in a jar. And I have a picture of that lamb, so that if we're talking about 100 years from now, it's entirely possible that we could have reproduction without eggs, without sperm, and without a uterus. And if we did that, we'd really be going places.
Boy, no kidding. And you thought you had ethical issues in 1981.
Right.
That's the one.
Absolutely.
Boy, that's the one you want to see people grapple with. You must be delighted with the growth of this facility that bears the name of you and your late wife. I mean, it must be very gratifying at this.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
But I constantly think about those things that need to be done. Yeah.
And that's what you get up and go to work for every day,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Right.
You'll be 98 years old in December, is that right?
If I make it, yes, I will.
And we hope you will.
Thank you.
As you think about 98 years old, you're still working every day. Lots of 98-year-olds, as you know, are not working every day. They're not in good enough health to be able to do that, or for a variety of reasons aren't doing that. What do you think has made it happen for you? What do you think has created that possibility for you?
Well, first of all, genes, I think it's hard to substitute for that.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interest in a particular thing. And I don't know whether the interest keeps one going or whether one keeps going and therefore has an interest. I don't know which is a horse and which is a cart. Yeah. But I find that I'm a little more content if I do try to deal with these things. I wouldn't want to give the impression that I work a solid day. I come late and I leave early.
That rank does have its privileges.
Right. But at any rate, I enjoy doing that and participating in the conferences and so on that we have at the Institute.
And so you're still traveling and doing those kinds of things?
My traveling is quite limited. Yes.
And I wonder, as you talk with younger doctors, because that's what this video talked about, you know, the next 10 years, you have these young researchers coming through.
Well, it's an interesting thing about the younger people. A good many of them have the impression that IVF has matured and is kind of an accepted thing, and there is a limited future. And if I have a mission, one of my missions is to try to make the younger understand that there is a future. We can improve things by making IVF, as we've said, more efficient, cheaper, and then there are these longer range goals which we come to in time.
And as you look, you know, all over the country now, you see IVF clinics now, just all over the country. Do you have any concerns about the way that and I'm doing air quotes now, that business has grown?
It is a concern to me that commercialization seems to sometimes play a role. This is true in medicine in general. That's different than I was accustomed to as a younger person. I can't say that I'm particularly like it. It's a fact. We have to deal with it. But I long for the days when medicine was a calling rather than a business. And it seems to be turning into a business, but that's the way it is.
And as you look, and boy, this is a terrible thing to ask you with 1 minute left. As you look at the longer term, this great discussion we're having now, well, we might be having about health care in terms of what, from a political perspective, how we go about that. Do you have some thoughts about, some sort of philosophical thought about that?
Well, my thought about that is that when you say health care for everyone, it doesn't mean much. You've got to know what you're talking about by health care, because health care consists of taking care of the common cold. So you need to know what's involved in the situation. But I think I have read enough to realize that if we're talking about the current political situation, that it's not going to be possible to provide good, extensive, inclusive health care to everybody without breaking the bank.
Oh, that's a tough place to leave it, but we're going to have to. Dr. Jones, I'm always glad to see you. Thank you for being with us tonight. I really appreciate your time. And I'll be back in just a moment with a final thought. I do remember well that day that America's first in vitro baby was born in Norfolk. It was December 28th, 1981, and I was still in my very first year at another television station in this community. And I knew that day was important, but now, 27 years after the fact, I realize there was something I didn't quite appreciate, in fact, at all at the time, and that is that Howard Jones and his wife, Georgiana, had already completed a full and distinguished career at Johns Hopkins and had reached the mandatory retirement age when they got the call to come down to Norfolk and help with a little old in vitro program. Well, the 23-year-old me in 1981 is now on the other side of 50, and telling the story today, it seems far more important to focus on the often unseen opportunities we all have in the second half of life. Who knows? Maybe the best really is yet to come. We'd love to hear what's on your mind about this or any other of our broadcasts. You can watch them all at whatmatters.tv. You can call in your comments or suggestions at 889-9437, or you can email us at whatmatters@WHRO.org. I'm Cathy Lewis. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Friday night for another look at What Matters.